Hello. It is very difficult to be the first after lunch, and so I'll do my best to keep you entertained. So my name is Jules. I am the CEO and founder of Revolution Cyber. Started the company back in 2019, and I'm probably going to be walking you through a lot of the lessons that I learned, attempting to help clients move beyond security to what a lot of CEOs, heads of state, leaders are more concerned about. It's this idea of resilience. And the keynote today is protecting the digital trust currency. So we're all in the Cayman Islands. It's one of the most notable spots for money transfers and for companies and countries where they're storing their money. So if we think about the importance of security in that, we want to consider the result, not necessarily the activity of security, but what is security in the Cayman Islands supposed to be working towards? And I would argue that it's about protecting what we're calling the digital trust currency, this currency of trust, and this idea of continuous cyber resilience in order to better secure our digital ecosystems. So I often hate to go into the who am I speech, but you have no idea who I am, so I'll start there. I am now a mom. I've got 2 kids in the back there, but I'm also an attorney who I would say decided years ago that I was probably a better salesperson than I would ever be an attorney. But I didn't know when I made that decision so many years ago that cybersecurity even existed. So as I don't practice as a formal attorney in any country, but I review contracts every single day. And so you can imagine how much my parents are upset at me that I wasted a degree and I can't call myself Esquire. But over the last few years, I spent a lot of my time talking about how the industry needs to move beyond this idea of traditional security. And thankfully, that's resulted in me being deemed a LinkedIn top security voice. I've actually appeared before the House of Representatives twice to talk about how to enable the cybersecurity workforce in the United States. And I've also been part of the team that led huge engagements for Fortune 500 organizations who are looking to scale security culture across their organizations, typically within 6 to 12 months. So what I want to talk to you today about is I want to reframe this idea of security, like I mentioned. I want to talk to you about how to build a defense mechanism. So we want to talk about continuous defense and talk a little bit about the IDRRA framework, which is a framework that my company coined. It's a 5-step framework around resilience. It's investigate, declare, respond, recover, and then adapt. And then I want to finally talk to you a little bit about what it is that we could do to strengthen trust in the Cayman Islands and across the Caribbean. So I'll start today by talking to you about why I started my company. Revolution Cyber started after I was SVP of a company called Fortress. We had 8 people who were tasked with one of the largest global cruise lines in the world to do a few things. One, they wanted to build a global maritime security awareness program, and they wanted that program to help them educate not only the technical people, but it had to be relevant to the people in the kitchen. The people who may never touch a security system had to understand at a basic level security at a foundational level. Ultimately, what we were able to do is take 8 people, some of us who are ICS specialists, myself never being in security for that long, and we went aboard 3 cruise ships in the Bahamas. And it was awful. The Bahamas is awful. It was so terrible to go there, but we made it work. And as a part of that trip, what we were able to do is that we assessed the ICS, the operational technology risk associated with their closed system closed systems on the cruise line. We also had 3 mandates. 1, we could not do an assessment that impacted their revenue by a cent, meaning when the cruise was set to leave, it had to leave. When the engineers were off break, they had to go back to work. And we could not impact any passenger's experience. So prior to getting on the ship, we'd been told, we're having issues where our cruise line is going out to sea and it's stopping in the middle of the ocean. And over again, we think it's an engine failure. What happens is we bring someone from the vendor to come on board, they fix the engine, we continue to float into the ocean, and the engine stops again. Because no one on the ship was aware of what the issue was, had no idea of cybersecurity, they kept attributing it to an engine problem. And this was costing them millions of dollars, because not only did they have to fly someone to meet the ship where it was, they had to stop the ship, they had to dock the ship, and then they had to do lots of things on that ship in order to ensure that the passengers were never impacted. So what we were brought onto the cruise ship to do was, over 3 days, 3 ships, and a full-blown assessment of all the systems on the ship. The only way we could do that was by interviewing every person who had any connection to the engine and gaining an understanding at the background of why they thought that these incidents continued to happen. We took some time, went through some of the documentation, because they document who was on the engine, whether the captain was in the room, what had happened prior to the ship sailing. And as a result of our assessment, which we presented to the CEO, Chief Procurement Officer, Chief Information Officer, the Chief Information Security Officer, and various other executives, it turned out that they were being hacked remotely. The ship was being hacked remotely in certain parts of the ocean by people with smaller boats who were tracking the ship. We could have only found that out had we gone onto those ships, because you can imagine what they told us. There's no way anyone's able to get into our systems because they're closed systems. There's no access. They assumed that all of their vendors were also trusted, so the vendors wouldn't be a risk to them. But we had determined from our assessment that not only was the system not closed, they had allowed a vendor to be monitoring using IT technology the operations of the engine, the fuel level, the amount of oxygen, managing how its maintenance was going. And that vendor had been breached and had not reported it to the cruise line. Ultimately, we got off the ships, we took that information, presented it to the board, and we were tasked with creating policies and then also a baseline level of knowledge that everyone on the ships needed to know, all of the administration in the cruise line needed to know, and this is across the globe. This cruise line was rolled out to 100 ships across the globe and translated into 40 different languages. So the scale of this operation made me realize that the work that I had been doing before that really focused just on security awareness definitely wasn't enough. Because it wasn't enough for people on the ship to just be aware. Each person who had an impact on that business also needed to be aware. They needed to understand their specific responsibilities. They needed to be communicated with regularly. And they needed to be set up as frontline resources because the security team was too small to react globally. And so my idea was that we wanted to start to build out an offering that I call security culture at scale. Why does it matter today? Well, it matters today because we're getting more and more connected to each other. More and more organizations, for their revenue, are relying directly on their third parties. So the conversations we're still having traditionally about this idea of first party, our company, and third party, their company, it's a lie. It doesn't exist. Some of the work I've done with really large aviation companies, think about companies, and we haven't worked with Boeing, but imagine, we did fly here on Boeing, but we haven't worked with Boeing. But imagine I were to tell you how many parts on the planes that we all fly on every day are actually provided by a third party. In the end, does it matter if the engine came from another company, but Boeing is responsible? Don't you also want that partner to have some basic knowledge about how to keep that system safe? So it doesn't stop with just the company that I know I'm doing business with. It matters across the digital ecosystem that everything in that ecosystem can be trusted and is resilient. So one of the things that I found interesting, because I really hate to go to talks where people are talking about things very generically, and they're not being as specific about what the most important pieces are of what you need to know today and how it's relevant to the space in which you exist. And so for this, I did some research. As an attorney, I can't help it, but what I wanted to do was bring to the table the fact that nothing I'm saying here is actually new. The Cayman Island Monetary Authority, they actually have put these rules and guidelines in place for regulated entities well before I got here. Back in 2020, the Cayman Island Monetary Authority, they proposed regulations that should be followed that would allow for 4 primary things. 1, building a cyber-resilient workforce. 2, ensuring that there was continuous adaptation for resilience. Their focus starts with cybersecurity, but if you read their guidance, it talks about keeping systems up. Can anyone tell me the difference between when I say security and when I discuss resilience? What's the difference? Anyone want to give it a guess? I'm going to start pointing people out. I'll pick you. Yes, you. Yes, cyber resilience versus cybersecurity.
I never heard of cyber resilience.
So I'm going to have you guess.
Security would mean, make sure that people don't get in, and resilience would mean extra defensive measures.
To what end? For what purpose? Oh, there you go. Security is the action. It's what you do in order to protect. And resilience is the outcome. It's what happens as a result of your security efforts. And so what I noticed with what SEMA wrote is that they were basically saying, we want everyone to focus not on the doing of the thing. We want people to focus on the outcomes. We want a more trusted workforce. We want more trusted systems. And if you think about what it is that most of us are thinking about with regard to Cayman Islands, we want people to trust our currency. And that can only be done if we focus less on the activities of security, because everyone here talks about an assessment. But I can tell you, I can tell in about 3 seconds the difference between a good assessment and a bad assessment. The good assessment tells you what they found, the problems, how to solve, and they also propose the remediation. The great report ties it back to the business and talks about the impact. And the bad one is a laundry list of what you did wrong. Good luck. We have a lot of bad assessments that we see in this world. I don't know if you guys have read them. I read them to laugh sometimes. Why? Because they're not designed to solve the problem. The problem is we are losing trust in our ability to do business online. And based on what the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority says, we should be holding the people at the top, our executives, responsible for that. Why? You cannot create a culture of resilience if you do not have buy-in at the very top of the organization. So, 1, a trusted workforce. 2, continuous adaptation. 3, we want to make sure that the leaders of the organization are responsible and accountable when these things don't happen. And then 4, we want to continuously adapt our risk and our threat efforts based on the business size, scale, reach. I work with a lot of companies. I've worked with one company. They started really, really small about 4 years ago. What we proposed to them then was tiny, because since then, they've expanded it, and I'm based in the US. They've expanded into different states. They're now working with the federal government. They are now part of the utility industry's third-party ecosystem, part of their supply chain. If I propose to them in 2024 what we proposed to them in 2020, they would fire us. And yet every day, I come across companies that are getting the same kind of feedback, the same quality of material that they got years ago, because the auditors want to make it easy, so we can't rely on auditors to make us safe. If you watch some of the videos that I have online, sometimes I'm saying compliance is security, and compliance can be security, but resilience is the goal. You can start to make your company compliant, but you've got to end at the point where you can adapt and quickly recover. So your organizations aren't spending hundreds of thousands on you, millions of dollars in investment so that they can say they do security. They're spending it because they want to actually be able to demonstrate they're secure. And the problem is, the only time you know that is when there's an incident, when there's a breach. So if the answer is we only know whether we're secure when an incident happens, then speed matters. Then accuracy is everything. And so I'm trying to motivate everyone here to really go back and look at, what is it that I am doing that is providing value for the people and the places that my efforts support? Because if I can't change your minds today, we will not be able to do the thing we all need to do, and we've got to stop focusing on just doing the thing. We've got to start challenging what we even believe, so that we can get everyone to a place where we're all on the same page, have the same baseline of, we need to make this country, we've got to make our own countries and our companies, we've got to make them resilient. And that's a heavy lift. It's not what we're used to. So as I was thinking about, because what I was looking for when I started to talk about resilience, it didn't exist. Every time I would go to someone, they would point me to NIST, or they'd be like, have you seen ISO? Oh, and I'm actually part of the first NIST privacy team, so I'm very familiar with NIST. But what NIST does is it makes suggestions to you of what you should do. It doesn't say you must do these things. It says you can. It's a guideline. It isn't a mandate. But what I wanted to do was say, if it were my job to help others become much more resilient, how would I go about that? And there are a number of ways that I could go about that, but I think the primary place I would focus is on response, is on incident response. How quickly can we save an organization if we knew that it was at danger and it was in harm's way? So I call it the IDRRA framework. It aligns with all of the major frameworks, so you can use it. But it's this idea that we need to do a few things. One, we've got to anticipate and assess risks as quickly as possible. But in order to do that, we've got to prepare. We've got to be ready. I talk to people all the time about the idea of firefighters. There are two examples of what I'm saying when I talk about resilience. Firefighters. Firefighters are trained to go into fires, to run to the bad, to run to the harm. And they spend years training for these few moments. And so if you think about what resilience means, it means you need to be able to get the call, understand what the impact and the risk is, declare what the actual event is. Is it a fire? Is it a bomb? What's going on? You also need to be able to identify who are the people that need to know this information as quickly as possible. And then you also need to protect and maintain whatever systems you can. So when a firefighter goes on site, they're assessing these things really, really quickly. It's the same thing what happens in a cyber incident. You're assessing the harm really quickly. Is there someone in our critical systems? What access do they have? What data are they accessing? Are they taking data out of the environment? Are they able to pivot and escalate into other systems? The IDRRR framework says it's most important that you respond, but as quickly as possible to minimize the impact and to ensure you can quickly recover. We also want to talk a little bit about being able to talk, because we also separate security and privacy quite a bit. They're not separate. One is designed to protect the data, and the other one is to ensure that it's for its proper purpose. Data that's stolen by hackers cannot be used for its proper intended purpose because most people are not giving permission to a hacker to share it online or to use it for its monetary gain. So we want to think about all of these things in split seconds. The quicker we can get at this, the more we can make our organizations more resilient. So I talked about this idea of preparedness in responding, but I also want to talk about mitigation, right? How are we reducing the impact of the breach? How do we quickly get in? How do we quickly get out? And how do we ensure that all of the stakeholders in your organizations, they're ready and able to also act as frontline defense in their roles? That can't happen while you're at the site of the fire, while the incident is going on. You've got to spend a lot of time talking to people, making sure they understand what they need to do, how they need to do it, and where you will communicate it. We also want to talk a lot about post-incident analysis. So when the incident happens, what do we do after it happens? Are we talking to the team, doing postmortems? Are we building what we've learned into future efforts? Are we doing more training? It's so important that this becomes a life cycle. We want to go from preparedness to mitigation to the response to recovery of systems and then return to normal operations. When I was talking to the CEO of a major, I would say they're a fast growth tech company, and I was asking him what he thought that his value proposition was. What did he believe was the thing that they did most important and differently than anyone else? And his answer was that we protect our customers before they know to protect themselves. Think about that business as a promise. And then you have a breach, and then you don't protect your customers. So he's not worried about security, he's worried about being aligned with what he's promising his customers. That's what they're willing to spend the millions on, that they can protect the brand, protect the reputation. So breaches that we consider to be tiny have huge monetary impact. And we're seeing it happen over and over and over again, and we're not seeing that reduced. And what we're also noticing is that companies are connecting more and more. So the only suggestion I have is everyone needs to better protect themselves, and by doing so, then they can protect their entire ecosystem. It's this idea of trust is that I'm doing the right thing because I understand my relationships to the other people that I work with, and I trust that they're also doing what they need to do. So when I talk about digital trust, it's we're all working together for the outcome of better companies, but also better economies, better ecosystems. I'm always trying to round it up because when I'm talking to the business leaders, they're often so confused about what we do. And they'll say, Juliet, we spend so much money. We don't even know what we're spending it on. So what are we seeing over and over again? Companies are laying off their entire security teams. We're seeing them outsource whole capabilities in the security department. But what they don't understand is that when you don't invest in yourself, you don't invest in the response, you're going to get exactly what it is you put in. Garbage in, garbage out. So what I think is important also is that we talk about this idea of trust being a team sport. And you can hear me talk about all the various stakeholders that are part of this. It's not something any one person can do alone. All of these people that you see listed, I want you guys to kind of figure out if any of these roles exist in your company today. Are you seeing a resilience leader? I've seen more and more cyber resilience leaders hired in the last year than I've seen in a very long time. I've also seen this idea of process owners, people who own a process in an organization. Why does it matter if we secure a process rather than a technology? Does anyone know? What about it? Thank you. That's exactly it. We can be technologists if we'd like, but we're actually securing processes. And if you think about process security, which doesn't exist, but if you think about the importance of securing a process, all the technologies that impact that process are important for us. It's a chain. When I talk about a process, I'm talking about, let's say, receiving revenue from customers. The critical system that every company I know is talking about now is protecting Salesforce, right? Protecting their member portals. They're looking to protect ways in which they get paid, protecting invoicing systems. Those are processes and technologies that support revenue. So even if we were to step back and think about resilience, if we were just to move from technology to process, we would already be going half the way. We don't want to individually think about systems. We want to think about how those systems impact the process and how the process impacts the entire company and how that company manages itself. We also want to think about this idea of resilience in action. As I mentioned, each of the 5 phases have specific details in each of them. In fact, I removed it because I didn't want to overwhelm with too much information. But if anyone wants to get more of this information, I have the full deck for you. In each of these phases, we're able to see, like an investigate. The idea of investigate involves several people. One, it's whomever the resilience leader is or the CISO. It also is the person most likely to be monitoring the systems at the time. Does everyone here have a company with SIM, SOAR? Anyone familiar with SIM and SOAR? Yes? Put your hand up, I can't. Is there anyone who doesn't have SIM and SOAR in their organizations? The smaller ones? How many people here are part of really large organizations? Put your hands up. Mid-size? Small business? Okay. Federal government or state, local government? Okay, that gives me a good sense. Out of the 5 phases, are any of you responsible for any of these phases as a part of your job? Which phase? All of them. What's your role? Really? Okay, great. And so you help other companies. Perfect. Who else? Has anyone seen anything like this in terms of the phases themselves? Is there anything else you're using that's similar? No. Is there anything missing? Is there anything you're hearing that maybe I haven't considered, that you've thought of? Because I know we're all in this and doing this work. Is there another phase that should be added that is not included here? The review and the improvements. That would be in the adapt phase, but you're right. That's an adapt. So would you say that your organizations are good at the adapt? Yeah? Talk to me. What do you guys do at the adapt stage at your company? We can't share anything. God, I would pick somebody who can't share. Got it. Anybody else? Oh, sorry. Is what? Oh, talk to me about that. How are you addressing that in your organization today? So where would you fit that as a phase in this? Right. So ownership is this idea of what, like delegating responsibilities to individual people and having them own specific parts? Okay. And would you say, let me see. So before you could respond in phase 3, you would have to have people owning their particular roles.
Yep, owning them.
Great. All right. Who, if you could decide, would be part of your response? What, inside your teams, who would you say are the best people prepared to respond?
I would say most likely leaders, the individuals that are responsible for creating an environment where the organization should strive. So leaders would be the individuals that would own the risk or own the problem.
Are you finding that they typically are the ones who don't want to own it?
Most likely because it's very daunting. It's very scary if they can't identify or can't solve the problem.
Got it.
So there is some hesitance.
Got it.
Or there will be some hesitance, should I say.
Got it. Okay. Can an organization be resilient if the leaders don't own the responsibility? You understand the question?
Not really, because leaders and being in position and constantly being in a phase where things are evolving and adapting, I think as leaders we need to go with the trend. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to be constantly evolving.
Yes.
So in order for us to be resilient, we need to go with where the technology is going.
Yes. That's a great point. What you're saying definitely aligns with why this particular framework exists, is because trying to build that into a process. I like this idea of ownership, and maybe building the ownership piece out of the declare would actually extend some of what it is that I'm saying here, but that's a great feedback. So to go back really quickly, so if we talk about each of the phases individually, one, when we think about phase 1, investigate, we want to determine the impact, we want to look at the risk levels, and we want to identify the stakeholders. We don't delegate yet, we just want to know who we're supposed to be talking to. So we want to proactively seek out what the primary risks are in the environment. We also want to start to think about deep threat analysis. What is it that we need to look at? How do we need to look at it? Are we using, what TTPs are being used? What vectors are they thinking about? All of this has to happen in split seconds. Because I think sometimes when I speak, people think when I say resilience, I mean this very flowery language. I mean forensics needs to be done too. I mean we need to have whatever, not penetration testers, but we need offensive security. So nothing in what I'm suggesting is not about security itself, but what it's saying is, in this phase, resilience looks like all of these things, not some of these things. We also want to talk then about declare. And the reason why I thought declare was important is because a lot of times, in organizations, when there is an attack, people are trying to hide it. No one's stating very clearly, we're having an incident. And as a lawyer, I'll be honest, I sometimes advise clients not to publicly state. It depends on a lot of different things that they should consider. But it's also really important when you're declaring an incident that people know to stop talking, to stop telling people outside the organization, amongst themselves, because oftentimes when fines are levied and when people come back and create liability, it's because of what was said during the incident. But you need a trigger point. that says, we are now formally in an incident, and these are the things we're now asking everyone to do. We also want to look at, so phase 3, I think, is one of the first and most important phases. It really is about ensuring at this point, that's how you can tell your posture. So whatever your security posture reports say, whatever assessments you're doing, if you don't respond better every single incident, you're not becoming more resilient. If you have a breach one year and then the next year you have a minor incident and your response times aren't different and in alignment, you're actually not getting better. And that's what this is all about. So we want to talk a little bit about Cayman Islands, because recently there was an incident, I believe in February of this year. And in everything that I read, because I was not personally involved, the nature of the response was fantastic considering what had happened. Immediately, based on Cayman Islands, they notified the public. They did things where they communicated to some of the entities and governments, so the US government, the British government. And a lot of the steps taken were done publicly. And within a month or two, they were able to address, they're still addressing, but the primary pieces of the response were addressed within 2 months. I'm from Columbus, Ohio. I live there now with my family, but I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, so I'll never be an Ohioan. Just want to say that. My family's Nigerian. But my city had an attack in July. 70% of their systems are still down. The mayor is publicly declaring every week that they're near a point where the cities are back up, and they have not been able to bring those systems back up. They've been investing in security for years. And during the attack, access to basic systems were down. Companies that did business with the government were unable to be paid. The city of Columbus was unable to complete contracts that they had in systems. I got a 2-month subscription to Experian. Thankfully, I don't even know why they give that out. But essentially, people like me had our data stolen. The notifications that the data was stolen didn't go out for 30 days. And the worst part, there was a city government employee who noted some of the ways that the government was trying not to publish this information, and they brought charges against him. It is, in fact, one of the worst responses to an incident I have ever seen. And it's a city that shares my data. So, of course, I'm taking it pretty personally. So when we talk about the difference between resilience and security, you can invest millions of dollars for years, but if you have an attack that takes your city down for 4 to 5 months, and the most you can get to is 70% back online, you're not resilient. And then there's no argument about it. They can't argue because it's very clear their response was out of alignment with the risk that they posed and their importance to various people who use their services. So that's why I want us to kind of move this along, because you can imagine that I don't trust the city of Columbus with my data anymore. I won't be moving, unfortunately, but right? So response is always so important. I like to talk a lot about Recover too, because some of the questions I want people to think about if they're thinking about resilience is, what systems do we need to get up? And what I loved about the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority's guidelines, you need to measure and recover 3 metrics: maximum tolerable downtime, how long can our systems be down? Recovery point, at what point can we get our systems back up to? So those backups become really, really important. So at what point, so is it 24 hours of data? Is it data that we stored over the last year? You've got to determine what your RPO is. And that guideline expressly states how to use that information and defines it. But it also talks about your RTO, so your recovery time. How long can you be down? Your systems be down. Each of your systems needs an RTO in resilience. So if Salesforce is critical to your organization, some companies, if Salesforce is down more than 6 hours, they will go out of business. If they're maximum tolerable downtime, some companies, if they're down fully as a company with all the processes or most of the processes unable to deliver for more than 2-3 weeks, they will go bankrupt. 60% of small businesses that have a cybersecurity breach go bankrupt within 6 months. So it's why I really, really, really want to caution us to not talk about security, about resilience and even operational resilience, because if it cannot operate, it cannot be secure. So if you have a really safe Salesforce that no one can access, who cares? Right? So I like to think about security as like a business imperative. This is important in order to ensure the business runs. Business continuity means that we're continuing to do business regardless of the impact of a hack, a threat, or any harm that we did not foresee. Adapt. And adapt is what separates security from resilience, so we want to spend time here. Cybersecurity is a moving target. We all know that. We hear that all the time. But how do we begin to embrace constant change? Nothing changes or stops because we're securing it. When the CEO told me that they wanted us to help them, but I could not cost them a cent, I realized that his focus was on resilience and not on security. We had to do it in 3 days, and we had to build the entire program within 8 months, and there was no waffling. He was very clear. It cannot cost us anything. They paid us, but it couldn't cost them business. And so adapting meant the next time they had an incident, which they did, of course, they were quickly able to identify what that incident was. They were quickly able to have people who were working on those systems tell the captain what they thought the problem was. And more importantly, they recovered their systems back as quickly as possible. One thing I didn't mention in the recover stage, you need to sometimes identify other alternate physical sites to bring the company back up again. So if you imagine there's a breach, but it is impacting your physical systems, you may need to move all your people and systems to another physical location. So it's pulling together privacy, trust. We're talking about physical security. We think of all of this as being so separate, but once we talk about resilience, it all matters. And it all has to be done correctly for it to work properly. We also want to talk about continuous improvement because it doesn't matter where we are today, what we can invest today. As long as the goal is to keep improving, I will tell you, most regulatory bodies will give you a little bit of leeway if they can see that you're better than you were and you have plans to do better than you were. So think about that the next time you're going to audit. If you don't have something already prepared, or if you've done something you never finished, you want to ask for leeway if you can demonstrate continuous improvement. We're better than we were, we understand the risk, and we're putting a plan together for the future. That is what resilience is. So culture of resilience for me means, and I like the gentleman's conversation about ownership. A culture of resilience means that from the bottom to the top of the organization, every person is critical to the ability for the company to recover, for the company to adapt. And everyone owns that their piece is critical to the operation of whatever security results or initiatives that we want to happen. I started to talk about culture rather than awareness because I know a lot of people who are aware but don't care. A ton. Can you imagine making them watch a video and then telling them to save the company during an incident? Who's watched a video where they could, build a car? Who's ever watched a video that allowed you to go out and do surgeries on people? Why are we doing videos and telling people that they should be more cyber aware? We're actually still in the month, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I'm hoping that we'll one day call it something else because we're still thinking people don't know. But what the truth is, people know and they don't care. So the question of resilience says, how do we make people care? How do we get people more engaged? What do we do and say to communicate the importance and have them align it with what their own personal motivations are? Culture says what people do when the security team is not watching. Culture always exists, by the way. Your culture today is either resilient or it's not resilient, but it isn't resilient or not resilient because you know it. What people are doing when you're not watching them is really your true culture. So I like to tell people that I've raised great children, and the way that I know if I've done it is when my kids go to someone else's house and they tell me I have good children. We've got to stop telling ourselves we're great, giving ourselves awards, when a lot of the time we know, if not for monitoring systems, people would be doing all kinds of crazy things. Because we're not even building digitally native, knowing children. Our children know how to use tablets, but do they know how to stay safe online? Do they know how to spot someone who isn't of the right age or has an untoward purpose in speaking to them? Do they know what it means to be socially engineered? Resilience starts when we're young. I grew up in New York City in Brooklyn, and there's this really funny commercial. It's like a tree grows in Brooklyn, just one tree grows in Brooklyn, New York. But what I can tell you that New York teaches you when you grow up there is, one, you don't get really attached to trees because there's only one. But then two, I can go anywhere in the world and survive. Because just the very nature and the culture of New York is about survival. There are 8 million people, and they all want to ride the same train into Manhattan at 8 a.m. So you're either going to get on the train or you're not. What I've learned is every part of the world requires a different part of me as a New Yorker. And that's what the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority is teaching us. Our culture requires us to adapt to every new scenario, place, risk, impact that we confront, because we're not going to be standing still. And every time we go into a new place, our business grows into a new geographic market. We expand a new customer line. We roll out a new product. Our idea of what it means to be resilient has to change. We can't just keep doing the same thing we've always done, because the way in which we're interacting and connecting has changed. And so how do we deliver security on the go in that way? How do we make security so that it is able to bob and weave with the company? Because a lot of times we're quick to say no when the answer is yes and. If we say no to the business, we're saying no to wanting to be paid in the future. So culture means the business gets its way and they allow us to build defenses that are dynamic, adjusting, adaptive. And so culture is not this very amorphous thing. It really is important that we talk about how culture drives behavior, how we talk about how security, like psychology, is one of the most critical things we can do to build a better security organization, about how workforce enablement, making other people responsible for security, to own it, is actually much more important and is a force multiplier than if we were to hire hundreds of security people. Despite $50 million spent by Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan Chase in 2014, they've had several breaches since. It's not for a lack of an investment. They're putting the money forth, but are they more resilient? And I think that's for them to know, because the breaches are not going to stop. The attackers are not going to stop coming after them, but they've got to change how they navigate themselves, how they move, how they operate. And so I put this up because, honestly, I like to think about sort of all the ways in which in this world now we are bound And so when I talk about this idea of cyber resilience, it really is about trust-driven innovation. We do not have the technology now to do what I'm saying. A lot of what we're doing now has to be manual, because the industry now is built on individual vendors selling us individual technologies that don't always talk to each other. But we're not going to get less and less connected to each other, so we've got to figure this out. So I want to provide a call to action. I want you all to keep in mind that trust remains the foundation of progress in our digital world, and we've got to invest in it today, invest in resilience today in order to secure the Cayman for tomorrow. It means that as we're sitting here today, we want to think about what it is that we're, like I said, bringing a value today, but we've got to think about where we think this country and our countries are going. Resilience requires that we be adapting to tomorrow as well. And I want to also drive everyone to think about, when they leave here, what is it that I could do today to automate everything I'm doing, to scale it? Because we're seeing the AI, and look, this idea of AI taking your jobs, we don't have to worry about it at our level. What AI really requires is that we all go up to the next level. So I like to think of it as like a room and water gets into it. AI is going to be doing the minutia, the repetitive tactics, those things that we really should be doing automated anyway. It requires that we move to more strategic thinking, more dynamic thinking, more human thinking, because what AI will never be is human. So one of the solutions to this problem is AI, but one of the risks and threats to this problem is AI because it also has its own security risk. And what I'm saying is, we've got to think today about how we can incorporate tomorrow's technologies in order to make a lot of this work the way we want it to work. Thank you. Oh, no. Questions, sorry. I've got about 8 minutes. Someone's got to have a question. Great.
What's your name again?
What's my name? Oh, it's my daughter. Mom.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Jules, you know I'm a huge fan. I'm a big Jules fangirl. I love this concept of culture, and I want to share a definition I have for you that you can improve on, because I think you can make this definition better. My definition of culture, and understand I come from a knowledge strategy, knowledge management background. That means anytime you hear aligning people, processes, and technology, that specifically is knowledge management. How I define that, how I define culture is what we know as individuals, plus how we share it with each other,
Yes.
and then how we hold each other accountable for not keeping the social contract that we have, right?
I love it.
So that's, when you think about culture, it's this really big concept, but I think you can simplify it. And I know that Jules can make that better.
I will go to it.
All right. Any more questions for Jules?
Thanks. Oh, sure. Sure.
All right. You were just talking about the resilience, right, to make sure nothing bad happens. I was thinking, what if, right, you do have complicated situations like what you were saying.
Yeah.
Suppose you are even friends with a person, right, and they know they're not supposed to bring their USB to work, and you are the boss, right? And suppose they complain to you like, no, I paid for this USB, and they constantly bug you about it, like, come on, I paid my money for this USB, you didn't provide it. And they constantly breach your security, and you feel like if you do tell them no, they're gonna get fired, right? How do people deal with dangerous situations like that?
I love that. So the old guard would tell you to show them a policy. Don't do that, please. It doesn't work. There are a few ways that I would think about that. So first, the question always is, what do you believe your responsibility is? Is it to this person or is it to the company? Because then if you think about that, then you understand the answer very quickly. It's like if someone is deliberately doing something that you're aware of, that you're not addressing because you don't want to make them get fired, then they should fire you, right? And in fact, in law and in law enforcement, you would be, and you'd both be an enabler and an accomplice. And so I don't know that I want to go to that extent, but I want each person to own their own responsibility and your own set of principles, because then you don't have the questions, right? I work with a number of companies, and a lot of my clients are my friends, and they'll do things that I know are wrong, and I set my line. Here's where I will not go with you, right? So you have an opportunity to put this USB away, and we can just forget it because there's no impact, but if it happens again, I'm going to have to report you. And you've got to make a decision that you're okay with that first. Because the truth is, if you're not, you're in the wrong job, right? Okay.
Excellent. Oh, thank you.
Hi, it's Jules, right?
It's Jules.
Jules, your presentation was absolutely fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you.
But I want to touch on something that you asked a question, and I thought you were going to answer the question because I wrote something here as a response, but I think you kind of skipped over it, where you talked about if everything should have an owner. It's something to that effect. You didn't actually answer it, and I scribbled here because your framework ID RRA is very similar to some of the others that are out there. I like yours actually, but it's very similar. And when you asked about the owners, I made a scribble here that in my world and how I see it, all processes should have owners. And those owners should be established ahead of time.
Yes.
Because you don't want to be making those decisions and determinations when you're in a crisis trying to deal with a cyber incident. So you're nodding your head saying that that's because I didn't actually hear you say. So are you saying that that's why it's supposed to be? All the processes should have owners pre-assigned.
Yes.
So we have to do a business impact analysis before.
That's exactly it.
So that we understand our landscape.
So so when I started my practice, one of the big gaps that I saw was that security is very heavily focused on the technology, and then the business was focused on the business systems. And yet, security was responsible for protecting business systems. One of the things that I've done as a part of our practice at my company is we do a BIA immediately, or we review the BIA, because we can't figure out what your crown jewels are and where to pull the most resources if we don't know what your critical processes are. Today, there is no platform that actually maps that out automatically, because the purposes that it's being done for are not aligned with, I want to know who owns the process and all the technology that align with that process. That doesn't exist yet. So yes, every process should have an owner. In addition, every process owner should be trained on what to do if their process is ever breached or impacted, to your point. Sure.
I hope I'm not stealing the gentleman from his thunder, but great presentation, but awesome question, because I want to connect the dots to that, what I call pretext of social engineering. Take a guess if you recall a previous thing on social engineering steps. What do you think the next thing the guy's going to ask you to do, right? You need to walk this USB stick out the door, and you're already in for a penny, in for a pound with me.
No, because like for business email compromise, they're almost always looking to find, through LinkedIn, what your role is and who likely you're connected to, and then they assume what processes that you would also be willing to approve. So I get emails as CEO all the time that go, I'm looking to change my banking account, and it's funny because I don't own that process. So every time it comes, I know it's someone trying to
You're being
fish me.
recruited.
Yes, exactly. So to your point, that's actually good to think about, is how to train on social engineering based on your role and the process that you own. Sure.
So I get the honor of the last question, I believe.
You do.
So you talked about the importance of regulations, and particularly in relation to resilience. What's your view on having punitive measures for failing to reach those? Should it be the carrot or should it be the stick?
Ooh. So, unfortunately, as a lawyer and as a culture person, the answer is it depends. But what I'll say is, culturally, like I find banks and financial institutions, they prefer the stick. And it's because when a process is failed or when someone doesn't do their job, the impact is so immediate that negative motivation works better than, hey, you know, we'd love for you to help us over here, right? But I often find tech companies, they use the carrot because they're very much about their culture, collaboration, and being punitive impacts the ability for the organization to work the way it wants to work. So I think it really is about the culture. And I will also tell you, you need to set a corrective action plan. The corrective action plan says, first time, here's your, we're just gonna give you a slap on the wrist. The second time, we're going to take it to your management or something. And then some companies go to third time fired, right? 3 strikes you're out. But other companies go, at that next stage, you're either going to have something that impacts the way that you do your job so that you understand what needs to happen. Those things need to be communicated when people are onboarding or as a regular part of how the organization runs. But I don't think that there's one way to do it. It depends on the organization. And actually, it's a stick for executives. It's a stick for people who have privileged access, and it's also a stick for anyone in the organization that has access to any kind of intellectual property or sensitive data. They should know that as a part of their job. Okay? Did I answer that? Yes. Okay. Thank you all so much.